Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Ted Simpson, class of '85, and I have the pleasure of serving as president of the Memphis University School Alumni Executive Board. I'd like to welcome Mr. Mutzi and his family, our distinguished faculty and faculty emeriti, alumni, and special guests to the unveiling of the 16th portrait in a series of faculty portraits that are on display here in the dining hall. The portrait series was created by the Alumni Executive Board in 2005 to honor MUS faculty members who have dedicated their lives serving our great and beloved school. There have been many changes in the appearance of campus over the past 2 decades, but these portraits serve as a daily reminder to the alumni, students, faculty, and friends that even though the school's physical appearance may change over time, our faculty have been unchanging in their steadfast commitment to provide the highest quality teaching and experience that our students and alumni treasure for a lifetime. Simply put, our faculty are the foundation upon which the excellence of MUS rests. The Alumni Board determined the criteria for selecting each faculty portrait recipient. To qualify, nominees cannot be current members of the faculty, and they must have served MUS for a minimum of 15 years. There is a remarkably high number of faculty who meet this criteria, which to me just shows the level of dedication and commitment that our faculty have to this school. And having personally been a part of many of the nomination meetings, I can say that there's a very impressive list of former faculty that we have to choose from. The discussions when we vote are always engaging and thoughtful, and often the voting goes on many, many rounds. So what I'm saying is it's no small feat to end up on one of these walls. This evening we are here to honor longtime teacher, Mr. Vincent Mutzi, whom the Alumni Executive Board selected in this year's subject in the series, as this year's subject in the series. Tonight you'll hear how Mr. Mutzi profoundly influenced MUS, his students, and fellow faculty members. Paul Gillespie, MUS class of 2001, couldn't be with us this evening, but he shared this message. When I think of the things that make MUS special, one of the first things that comes to mind to me is the teachers. Many of their portraits hang on the walls around us, and it's only fitting that Mr. Mutzi will be joining this list of teachers who have meant so much to the school. I think back to my time in Spanish 1 and Spanish 2 with Mr. Mutzi and realize those are some of my favorite memories at MUS. When we recently met for our 20-year reunion, I'll bet more stories were shared from Mr. Mutzi's classroom than anywhere else. Mr. Mutzi was the type of teacher that had a wonderful grasp on subject matter, but he didn't take himself too seriously. He was beloved by hundreds of Spanish students over the years and is well deserving of this honor today. Our first speaker this evening is our headmaster, Peter D. Sanders. Pete is now in his 5th year at MUS, where we are benefiting from his more than 3 decades of experience as an independent school educator and administrator. At his core, Pete is a teacher. In addition to his myriad duties as headmaster, he also teaches a section of U.S. history to freshmen. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our distinguished headmaster, Pete Sanders.
Thank you, Ted. And before I read from these carefully prepared remarks, I do want to make a comment about this ceremony. This is one of my favorite events. And for me, it truly represents the culture of the school. And Sam Graham's here. Great. I'm going to talk about you, Sam, because when I was still a candidate, I was given I think, under the cover darkness tour of the campus. And we came in here. And of course, I was very excited about the prospect of MUS. But I have to tell you, when I came in here and saw these portraits, and these were explained to me, it was the clincher. Because a school that honors its faculty is a school that has its heart in the right place. And it speaks to what is special about this school. So this ceremony is something I always look forward to. I'm greatly honored to be here for the unveiling of Mr. Mutzi's portrait. In talking with alumni and the many faculty I see during the day, I've come to discover the extraordinary influence Mr. Mutzi had on students in and out of the classroom. What makes Memphis University School so special is the positive interaction that goes on in the classroom between gifted teachers and eager students. When alumni return to campus, they of course want to walk around the grounds and look at the buildings. They want to see their teachers. I've visited many independent schools over the years, and I've never seen such a wonderful and meaningful example, again, of honoring teachers as the portraits lining our dining hall tonight. And, you know, we're starting to run out of space. We're going to have to get creative here because we have a lot more that we'll be putting up in the years to come. Vince Mutzi joined the faculty of MUS in 1970, having grown up bilingual in English and Italian. He earned his BA and MA degrees in Spanish and English from Ole Miss and completed additional graduate studies in language and linguistics at the Monterrey Institute of Technology and Higher Education in Mexico before embarking on his life's vocation. Over the years, Mr. Mutzi taught a variety of Spanish classes, including Spanish 1 and 2, Accelerated Spanish 2, and Spanish 3. Mr. Mutzi was among the first teachers to adopt new technologies to enhance learning here at MUS. Early on, his students benefited from their experience in the language lab, as well as from other technological tools he incorporated to support his classroom teaching. Outside the classroom, Mr. Mutzi served for many years as faculty sponsor to the Spanish Club, actively promoting its social and academic activities. In addition, he was well known as faculty advisor to the MUS chapter of the National Honor Society, serving as chairman of its selection committee for 24 years. The four pillars of the National Honor Society, scholarship, service, leadership, and character, are virtues he strived to instill in all of his MUS students. Mr. Mutzi's devotion to the school was rewarded in 1995 when he was named an honorary alumnus in recognition of his 25 years of service. His loyalty to the school, commitment to truth, honor, and fairness, sense of humor, and positive impact on generations of students have earned him the highest regard from the entire MUS community. Upon his retirement in 2008, the Board of Trustees recognized Mr. Mutzi by naming him Faculty Emeritus of Memphis University School. And is in keeping with when we honor a language teacher. When we did Dr. Dahl, I had to speak in French, and I didn't do such a good job. This time it'll be in Italian, and the quote is from Federico Fellini, who said, "Un idioma distinto es una visión diferente de la vida." A different language is a different vision of life. Thank you, Mr. Mutzi, for bringing a different vision of life to so many MUS students. To you, your wife Angela, and family and friends, colleagues and former students, I hope you enjoy this special ceremony, which is truly a remarkable MUS tradition.
Thank you, Mr. Sanders, for those remarks. Our next speaker is Mr. Bo Summers, a member of the class of 1994. In addition to being a student of Mr. Mutzi's at MUS, he was involved in Model UN and served on the staff of the Owl's Hoot for 2 years. Bo continued his studies at the University of Mississippi, where he received a bachelor's degree before also earning a law degree from Ole Miss. Prior to opening his own law practice, Bo served as Assistant District Attorney General for Shelby County, and before that, Special Assistant United States Attorney for the Western District of Tennessee. Bo has also previously served on the MUS Alumni Executive Board. Ladies and gentlemen, Bo Summers.
And I used to eat in Clack Dining Hall. Buenas noches. Es un verdadero honor de estar aquí esta noche para celebrar la carrera de Vincent Mutzi. I'm sorry, did I just slip into Spanish? See, Mr. Mutzi, I told you I was paying attention. So in English, it is truly an honor to be here this evening to celebrate the career of Mr. Mutzi. I've gotten to sit in this very hall on multiple occasions as we've honored the various teachers to this honored spot, these hallowed halls. And it is only fitting that Mr. Mutzi tonight gets to join that elite group. And it's an honor for me to be here to present that, be part of the presentation. I've got to tell you, whenever I return to MUS, it's super cool. It's immediate that I am tackled by memories. Although the campus may change, the memories still assault you. And I was thinking about this. Is it really the memories that are commensurate with the campus, or is it the fact that the men whose faces are in these halls and the faces that I see in the crowd tonight that represent the faculty that taught me, are those the memories? Are they the responsible party? And I would submit the latter. That the teachers, as was mentioned before, are what makes MUS. You see, the students come and we go, but the mold that sets us on the trajectory to become the student in college, the law student, the father, the husband, and the professional that we ultimately become is set and started in these halls. And dear MUS, how kind the fate that brings us to these halls, and how fitting that here we are in a hall amongst some of the great teachers that helped forge the legions of young men that we call MUS students that have gone on to do great things. Tonight, I'm proud to specifically be talking about Mr. Mutzi. And I don't know how you can appropriately say all that a teacher was or is. All I think you can do is talk a little bit about what that teacher meant to you. And then from there, allow those that are listening to extrapolate to how perhaps they affected all that were in his classroom. Mr. Mutzi is a special teacher, I can assure you. And you remember the first time you meet him because there's no mistaking that soft-spoken, heavy Southern accent that I guess only can come from the Mississippi Delta. And in 1991, this student came to MU, or this student formerly became one of Mr. Mutzi's students. Before I go further, I did want to just reflect on and again, I'm a lawyer by trade, so my notes are not quite as organized but let me, here we are. And this is a letter from Paul to the Romans. For by the grace given me, I say to every one of you, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment, in accordance with the faith God has distributed to each of you. For just as each of us has one body with many members, and these members do not have all the same function, so in Christ we, though many, form one body, and each member belongs to all the others. We have different gifts, according to the grace given to each of us. If your gift is prophesying, then prophesy in accordance with your faith. If it is serving, then serve. If it is teaching, then teach. If it is encourage, then give encouragement. If it is giving, then give generously. If it is to lead, do it diligently. If it is to show mercy, do it cheerfully. When I first thought about my words for Mr. Mutzi, and I guess in my years, this passage on vocation has become more important to me, because when you're young, you get into your profession, you don't really see the way, in fact, God's gifts may once serve you in your profession or how you may serve Him. It is only through reflection that you recognize that those gifts are what they are and has led you where they lead you. And thinking about Mr. Mutzi's life and reflecting on some of the notes that he shared with me on where he came from and where he has ended up, there's no doubt that God has been instrumental in Mr. Mutzi's life. And more importantly, Mr. Mutzi's been influential in all of our lives. And when I say all of us, again, the legions and countless students with which had the pleasure of sitting in his classroom. Mr. Mutzi was given many qualities: joy, passion, compassion, kindness, patience, and love. I will focus on a couple tonight because I think my time is already probably running long. But I will say that when when I first met Mr. Mutzi in 1991. This guy was about 5 foot nothing, about 110 pounds, had not grown an inch in 4 years. And to say, going from a seventh grader who had girls calling him and was pretty popular and pretty hip and swinging and the guy, to going to somebody that everybody thought he was their little brother, and when you went out with your buddies to the movies, I was their little brother as well. My confidence was waning a bit. And as a young student at MUS, I wasn't, and I know that all the teachers in here will probably beg to differ, I was a great student. But in my youth, I was not quite as diligent as I needed to be in my studies. And that's where Mr. Mutzi found me, as a young student in his Spanish class. And I say this because when I sat in these different procedures where we honor the various teachers, I have often thought, wow, well, it certainly makes sense that the speaker is going to be that teacher's best student, right? I mean, that only makes sense. When Mr. Mutzi asked me to present this, I was taken aback because, again, that would be my thought. That would be my inclination. Somebody that dominated Spanish, that was in all the clubs and all the societies and went around showing a straight A student. But then I started thinking, that's not who Mr. Mutzi is. And that's why I'm here. Because I wasn't that student. I was actually the student that needed a little bit of extra kindness, that needed a little bit of extra love, that needed a little bit of extra compassion and attention. Because I was a struggling student. While I smiled all the time and I had a lot of friends, I think I was hiding a little bit of lack of self-confidence, and I was the little guy. Mr. Mutzi didn't see that. Mr. Mutzi saw potential. He saw somebody that smiled all the time, somebody that was happy, and somebody he could help. And so a struggling Spanish student every day in his class would meet Mr. Mutzi, always in a good mood, always in the best spirits, exuberantly teaching his subject matter, which, by the way, wasn't always the most entertaining, but Mr. Mutzi sure thought it was, and his love of it was infectious. Part of this, and again, I've kind of skipped over, but I want to move back to the gifts. We reflected on the many gifts, and one of the gifts that was mentioned earlier, and I think will be mentioned by later speakers, is Mr. Mutzi's also got a great sense of humor. And my gosh, if you're going to have to be dealing with 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old hormone-ridden male students, you're going to see a lot of tomfoolery, and you're going to need a sense of humor. And I know that Mr. Mutzi dealt with his fair share. I remember one time in our class, and this is a good story, I think, to illustrate what I'm talking about. Back in the days of technology, we had these really cool things. We had these TVs on these rolling carts with VCRs. And one sat prominently on the left side of Mr. Mutzi's classroom, where he would play videos to help teach his classes. Someone, a venturous soul in my class, was able to obtain, I guess, a remote control from a Radio Shack or something to where you could program it to turn on said TV. So Mr. Mutzi would be rolling, would be in the middle of a lecture at the chalkboard in full swing, and all of a sudden, the TV would come on. And it would just blow Mr. Mutzi's mind. How did that TV come on? And he'd go over and he'd look at it, and he'd study it, and finally he'd turn it off and go back to what he was doing. And this clever classmate of mine would wait, and about 10 minutes later, he'd fire that TV back up. Mr. Mutzi never lost his patience, never lost his cool. At some point, he takes that TV, unplugs it, and rolls it back into his office and continues to teach his class. A great example of getting the joke, of allowing young men to be young men, idiots that we were from time to time, and yet showing the patience to continue to teach his class and not lose his temper. And I know there are vast stories of Mr. Mutzi's patience, and I again will be a shining example of said patience, because I know I was a trying student. I would submit that the gifts that God provided Mr. Mutzi that took him from the University of Mississippi and led him to the mountains of Colorado, where he first taught his first class outside of Denver, and brought him to Ross and Lynn's attention and to MUS in 1970. His gifts were God-given and have given MUS a true honor. Again, it is my honor to be here to welcome Mr. Mutzi to these hallowed halls. 38 years of excellence. I am but one voice and one product from the mold. There are legions of men, both young and old, who I speak for when I say thank you, Mr. Mutzi. I aspire to impact those I meet with my gifts. I aspire to use my vocation as selflessly and honorably as you have, Mr. Mutzi. You may have always been soft-spoken, but you certainly carry a big stick. Dear MUS, how kind of fate that brought us to these halls. May this hall honor you and all the teachers that make this great school for as long as these halls are here. Thank you.
Thank you, Bo, for those very nice remarks. We also have with us tonight another Mutzi scholar, Paul Reeves. That is kind of funny. A member of the class of 1984. During his years at MUS, Paul played basketball, soccer, and baseball, served as student council chaplain and a member of the Owl's Hoot staff. He has served as a member of the MUS Alumni Executive Board and was honored as MUS Alumni Volunteer of the Year by the Alumni Association in 2007 and 2008, recognizing his years of service as a volunteer coach. Paul has served as a district vice president with the Lutheran Church Extension Fund for more than 25 years. He earned his Bachelor of Science in Business Administration from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and his MBA from the University of Memphis. Please join me in welcoming Paul Reeves.
And Ted, it wasn't that funny about the Spanish scholar. Good evening, everyone. It's good to be here and see a bunch of familiar faces. When Mr. Mutzi called me some months ago and asked if I would speak at this event, I quickly answered that I'd be honored to speak on behalf of my teacher and friend. After this initial conversation, I would periodically think about what I was going to say about Mr. Mutzi, knowing that I had plenty of time before the big day. As time passed and I began to formulate my thoughts, I felt like I needed to meet with Mr. Mutzi and get some more clarity of what I might say about who Mr. Mutzi really is, what really makes the man we are honoring today. I really wanted to say something memorable, maybe something even clever. So, a few weeks ago, I had lunch with Mr. Mutzi. And for the next hour and a half, we reminisced about many things, most of all our time at MUS. During our lunch, it struck me of what I wanted to say about Mr. Mutzi. And while it's probably no revelation to any of you, and not particularly clever, I think it's important that he be recognized for what seems to be a lost art today. I can sum up Mr. Mutzi in one simple way. He's a gentleman. He's polite, kind, courteous, honorable. He has a positive outlook on life. He values others and their opinion. He's well-spoken and a generous listener. I could go on, but you get the point. Mr. Mutzi is someone to be emulated. For 38 years as a teacher here at Memphis University School, Mr. Mutzi passed on his gentleman qualities to thousands of boys whose lives were touched by him. Mr. Mutzi carried out in his own simple way the very mission of the school, molding young boys into young men, young gentlemen who lead and serve their neighbors and communities. Mr. Mutzi is a testament to the endearing truth about those who serve at MUS. The academic rigor teaches many important lessons, but the lessons learned by following the examples of people like Mr. Mutzi are just as timely and important, if not more so. Mr. Mutzi served at MUS in many ways, but outside of the classroom, he is probably best remembered for his 24 years as the chairman of the National Honor Society Selection Committee, and more importantly, his oversight and direction of the induction ceremony. When asked by Mr. Thorne and Mr. McQueen to serve in this capacity, Mr. Mutzi accepted the role and turned what was a rather pedestrian ceremony into something regal and much more fitting for the occasion. Mr. Mutzi did things with class. Now, I would be remiss as a former student of Mr. Mutzi's if I didn't share at least one classroom story with you. Back in the mid-'80s, MUS installed what at the time was state-of-the-art foreign language lab equipment so that students could better learn to speak the language as well as read. So on select days, we would have our lab time, which consisted of Mr. Mutzi pressing the button from the control panel, which looked like the dashboard of an airplane, and the headsets would miraculously descend from the ceiling for each student. Unfortunately for Mr. Mutzi, this presented an opportunity for boys to be boys, and one that couldn't be passed up. Having an organizational period before our Spanish class allowed just enough time for some unnamed, deviant, young 15 and 16-year-old boys to carefully sneak into the Spanish classroom and fill the ceiling tiles where the headsets would descend from with wads of paper. Lots of them. Think New York City on New Year's Eve. At the appointed time, Mr. Mutzi, unsuspecting of any foul play from the yahoos he was subjected to, would dutifully press the button, and the aforementioned paper wads would cascade down on the floor, and a thunderous roar of laughter would ensue from the participants. Mr. Mutzi then, in his sternest voice he could muster, would say, "All right now, you fellas are misbehaving. Take out a sheet of paper. We're going to have a pop quiz." The sudden chill of reality then would run down this student's back as I knew I was doomed. I'm pretty sure to this day that Mr. Mutzi threw those quizzes away, and deep down he too was smiling. I can attest that Mr. Mutzi knew to be a good teacher involves some degree of give and take with the students. He did this well, and in turn was well liked and respected. While we were having lunch, Mr. Mutzi shared a number of things that he valued in his life. Of course, his wonderful wife, Angela, his family growing up, including his grandmother who taught him Italian and helped him develop a love for languages, his role for 24 years as the chairman of the National Honor Society Selection Committee here at MUS, and many more. Mr. Mutzi shared many things in that hour and a half that I could share today, but there's one in particular that sticks out. As we talked about his 38 years at MUS, I could sense just how much Mr. Mutzi loves this place. It's special to him. In fact, Mr. Mutzi said the world could use a lot more places like MUS, a lot of them. I think we would all agree. I think we would also agree that the world needs a lot more people like Vince Mutzi, a lot of them. Congratulations, Mr. Mutzi, on this prestigious honor you're receiving today, and on behalf of all of the boys whose lives were touched by you, thank you for being a gentleman to all of us.
Thank you, Paul. Surprisingly well done. Next, we will hear from Faculty Emeritus Rick Brewer. Mr. Brewer taught history and social studies in the lower school from 1973 to 1980. After a 16-year hiatus, he returned to MUS in 1996 as principal of the lower school. He served in that capacity up to 2005 when he was named academic dean until his retirement in 2011. In that same year, he received the Jean Barbie Hale Award for Outstanding Service. Please welcome to the podium Rick Brewer.
Thanks, Ted. It really is a pleasure to be here to tell you a little bit about Senor Mutzi. He's a good friend and a respected colleague. Known him for a long time. He was already in his third year when I arrived on campus in the fall of 1973, and it's completely fitting and a great pleasure to celebrate the addition of his portrait to the fantastic collection that we see on the walls around us. Memphis and MUS have changed a little since Vince and Angela arrived in Memphis in 1970. The eastern city limits were at White Station Road. The land just west of MUS was a cow pasture. And even when I arrived, Mr. Thorne told me that MUS was eligible to receive payments from the government for not planting cotton. So, on campus, the Hyde Library and the whole lower school buildings opened during Vince's first year. Popular clubs at the time included the Model Rocket Society and a hunting and fishing club. So there were rockets being fired on campus, and the photo taken of the hunting and fishing club on campus included rifles. Probably not happen that way today. But some things haven't changed much. Vince has told me that his first impression, and one that stuck with him, was the beauty of the MUS campus, in particular Humphreys Hall, the administration wing. And when you see his portrait, I think you will appreciate how that first impression stuck with him. It's clear from yearbooks that Vince was popular immediately with students. The OWL for the 70-71 school year presented the faculty in groups, not by department. Some of the groups were coaches, intellectuals, young teachers, individualists, and females. They had a separate section for women teachers. Vince was placed by the editors in the individualist category, characterizes teachers with quiet and reserved personalities, which I think we've heard about. I would say he was in good company. Others in that group included Ellis Hagewood, who was described as a welcomed addition to the faculty basketball team, and Skip Daniel. So that's pretty good company for your first year, Vince. What they had to say about Vince was that Mr. Mutzi made many friends due to his odd sense of humor and flair for cooking. And there's a photo of Vince at the front of the class with the caption, "Morris Mutzi takes time out to discuss the preparation of pasta," which I'll come back to pasta in just a minute. A sign both of his good sense of humor and the fondness students had for him involves one of his cars, which, not surprisingly, was Italian, a Fiat. More than once, the Fiat would mysteriously move from the parking lot to the porch of the old student lounge. And once they'd had their fun, the boys would obligingly lift it back off the porch for Vince to drive home. But back to pasta. I didn't know until recently that he spent many hours in the kitchen of Grissani's restaurant on Airways Boulevard learning how to make ravioli and other dishes from Big John Grissani himself. We retired faculty and staff know that food is still important to Vince. About 4 years after he retired, he organized a monthly faculty lunch club, really faculty and staff, for all retirees, which meets at different restaurants around town. We've hit the pause button for COVID, but all of us are anxiously awaiting his email telling us that we're back in business. One retiree said, "We're counting on him to keep the MUS spirit alive in those who are no longer on campus regularly." And it really does. It's really been a great thing to be able to go and just have good fellowship with our colleagues, our former colleagues. As you heard, the teaching of language evolved with a lot of technology pretty rapidly, and I have to tell you another story about the language lab that Vince inhabited as a Spanish classroom. Colonel Lynn was so proud of this shiny new innovation that he frequently brought guests around to show them the equipment and have Vince explain how he used it in his classroom. And of course the students loved that because it was a great interruption, and they would stand when Colonel Lynn entered the room, and whatever had been going on, a test, a lesson of some sort, would be delayed as long as he and the guest stayed. And I think the boys tried to use mental telepathy to will them to stay as long as possible. Also, an alum remembers that from time to time, students would lip sync words while making hissing and gargling noises into the mics. And what he said was, we could send Mr. Mutzi into a twitching fit of switch flipping and dial twisting. But even with the shenanigans of students dealing with the technology, Vince embraced educational technology as a way to connect with students and to become a better teacher. And from those early years of language lab to near the end of his time of teaching, when he really used his faculty web page to enhance what was going on in class, technology has always been an important tool for him. As you've heard, a principal part of his legacy here is his shepherding of the National Honor Society chapter. It's hard to say how seriously he took it. He just embraced that job fervently and strove every year to do absolutely the best job that he could do with it. And one of the things I think about making the ceremony a little more solemn was when he broached the idea to Mr. Thorne of lighting candles. I think Mr. Thorne was a bit nervous about candles in the chapel, but especially with students lighting them, but it did work out, and the ceremony is very impressive and meaningful to all the students, especially those who are inducted. And I would say that of the many contributions that Vince has made to MUS, his work with the National Honor Society ranks right at the top of the list. One of the things that my job is, I think, is to tell you a little bit about how his colleagues feel and felt about Vince. And I have just kind of a list of impressions and phrases and words that different faculty members, both current and retired, have told me. And I'm just going to read this list to you because it's impressive. A passionate instructor, unconditional commitment to the betterment of the school, caring, never left students behind, a good friend, supportive of new language teachers, total devotion to MUS students, always push students to do their best, a perfect gentleman toward students, staff, administrators, and colleagues, a natty dresser, professional, punctual, sensitive, just the nicest person, compassionate, loyal, loves MUS. So based on that list, I'm sure it's no wonder how happy I am to be here to help celebrate this great honor for Vince Mutzi and to see him receive, have the honor of having his portrait added to this group of those that are around us. So congratulations, Vince.
Thank you, Mr. Brewer. Our portrait of Mr. Mutzi is by celebrated artist Fielding Archer. Mr. Archer graduated from Virginia Commonwealth University with a BFA in painting and printmaking. His work captures the soul of his subject through the use of color and simplicity of form. His compositions rely less on traditional pictorial structure and more on the use of color, perspective, and composition. This seemingly effortless hand that is seen in his paintings, combined with his ability to easily capture the likeness and spirit of his subject, has also enabled him to become one of the country's leading portrait painters. He has been described as an artist by his contemporaries. An award winner in national juried exhibitions, Mr. Archer's art is included in numerous private and corporate collections, now including Memphis University School. Unfortunately, Mr. Archer cannot be with us this evening. He is represented locally by Mrs. Elizabeth Francis, a broker for Portraits, Inc. Now I'd like to ask Mr. Mutzi and his wife Angela to join Mr. Sanders and me as we unveil the portrait. As the walls of the dining hall continue to become lined with portraits of revered faculty members like Mr. Mutzi, who have played important and influential roles in the lives of generations of students, we are constantly reminded of the primary reason we continue to appreciate and support Memphis University School. Mr. Mutzi devoted his life to the students and to the school. His influence will continue to impact so many of us for years to come. On behalf of Memphis University School Alumni Executive Board, it is my pleasure to present to the school this portrait of Mr. Vincent Mutzi.
Lower this thing a little bit, Ted. Could you lower that a little bit? Either that or I can stand on a box.
All right, is that okay?
Yeah, that's better. Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for being here this evening to share this occasion with Angela and me, the unveiling of my portrait and my inclusion in the faculty portrait series. I'm grateful to Fielding Archer for his artistry with the paint and the brush. He's caught my likeness and demeanor, although I think he did flatter me a little bit. I gave him permission to do that. And many thanks to Perry DeMint and his staff for organizing this event, and especially to Ted Simpson and the Alumni Executive Board for this recognition. Bo, Paul, Rick, thank you also for your very kind words. But I have to say, truthfully, it's been an honor for me to have been able to teach at this school for 38 years. MUS has given me so much more than I could ever have contributed. Angela and I both realize it's true God's grace and blessing that we have enjoyed this fine school. And even today, we're still reaping the rewards of having many dear friends and acquaintances whose company we could never have enjoyed were it not for MUS. When Colonel Lynn interviewed me in 1970, 52 years ago in Savannah, I was teaching at Georgia Southern University, and I never really intended to come and teach on the secondary level, but he made the offer attractive, and I accepted. And I remember well my first visit to MUS when I saw the beautiful Humphreys Administration Building, and Fielding has used that so beautifully as a background in this portrait. And since that time in 1970, I have always been proud to say that I teach at MUS. You know, it's a private boys' school out on Park Avenue. And I'm still proud today for many reasons. In fact, 100% of our seniors go on to four-year colleges. It's a fact that we have a teacher-student ratio of 7-to-1. It's a fact that 67% of our teachers hold advanced degrees in their fields of specialization. It's a fact that the average number of teaching experience, years of teaching experience, is over 20 years. And you may not know this, but since its inception, this school has had in place a very successful student-run honor council. This is a real tribute to the maturity and discipline of young minds here at MUS. These are, of course, all statistics of which we can and rightfully should be proud. Not many schools can boast of these accomplishments, but they are still not the main reason for my pride in standing here before you today. From its beginning in 1893, the primary goals that the founders of MUS had was to the growth and cultivation of Christian gentlemen. Needless to say, that was a lofty goal then, and even more so today. In more recent times, our mission statement and philosophy have evolved somewhat, but the emphasis at this school continues to be honor, integrity, leadership, personal responsibility, and respect for individual differences. I'm going to quote Sam Graham, former chairman of our Board of Trustees. Sammy put it this way: at MUS, our mission and philosophy statements are not slogans that hang on walls collecting dust. I think that was so well spoken, Sammy. Thank you for that. In my mind, this is the real spirit that permeates these classrooms and hallways. It's a spirit that was unleashed by our founders and continued so passionately in our headmasters of the modern MUS. Men like Ellis Haywood, Gene Thorne, and Colonel Ross Lynn, and current master Pete Sanders continuing that tradition. So then, we today, the MUS community, have inherited that legacy, and we enjoy the benefits that the earlier ones have left us. It's that passion to do the right thing, to honor and respect one another, to strive to do one's best in encouraging others with a generosity of spirit. That has been the bedrock of the legacy we have inherited. And of course, we all want to maintain that spirit of camaraderie and purposefulness that we enjoy today. Now, it would be disingenuous for me to tell you that everything was perfect at this school. No, it was not perfect. On a much lighter note, I fondly remember the time when seniors let loose a flock of chickens in the courtyard. Chickens. Or billy goats. There was another time when we came to school and billy goats were grazing all over the campus. In fact, one of them set chase to Claire Farmer, who was living nearby mowing her yard. One of these billy goats hung around for a while and chased her so that she had to stop. She tells me about that and remembers it fondly. There was another time we were invaded. Do you remember the little Shoney's big boys? The little statues about some? We were invaded by an army of about, I don't know, it seemed like over 100 big boys. They were all over campus. You'd open a door and there was a big boy looking at you. Go to the restroom, there was another big boy. I don't know, Paul, did your class have anything to do with that?
Class of 84.
Yeah, class of 84. Paul Reeves, you can blame him for some of that. Anyway, some of them chose to hang around for a month or more. They were around. I think you guys forgot where you left them. I don't know what happened. And then, of course, there's the story about my little Fiat Spider. I got this little sports car from Ron Spence. It was in mint condition, and I loved to drive to school in that car. Well, the kids loved it too. And like I say, at one time it was up on the porch of the Student Union building. It got so bad that when I left school in the evening, I never knew where my car would be. So it happened more than once. So anyway, I ended up started parking over by Marigold's. I said, I don't need this. I'll just park off campus. That kind of put an end to that. They were looking and looking, they never found my car. I also remember when Colonel Lynn would come into the room showing off the language lab. I don't know why he chose my room. I guess he liked the decor. I was always pretty neat with decoration. I had it looking very Hispanic. And he would come in very proud to show it off. And the kids took advantage of that, of course. Whatever we were doing, they were happy to stop. Back then we had a custom, a tradition, when the headmaster walked in, or any other teacher for that matter, you had to stand. And they loved standing. And they would initiate a conversation with Colonel Lynn just to make certain that it went on as long as possible. Okay, looking back, way, way back, I realized it was my grandmother who really got me into teaching. She's the one that commanded me to do things in her native Italian, and I loved it. And I think that's what brought me into languages. That's one of the things that caused me. I love being able to speak another language. I was fortunate to have that opportunity. I think through everything I did at MUS and being here for so long, I would say of all the activities I was involved in, that being in the National Honor Society Selection Committee, it gave me an insight into the diversity and caliber of the students that we have. It really helped me to understand. It made me realize that in order to be successful, sometimes you need to be a giver and a taker, a teacher and a student, a talker and a listener. We have to play dual roles. We have to be winners and losers, have to be equally successful in all of those areas. And I think this is what goes on here at MUS in the best possible way. And let me also say that I know that these past years, these past 2-3 years of having to deal with COVID has been difficult. It's presented unprecedented challenges to the school and teachers, but I want to commend and issue kudos to the faculty and students, and especially to Assistant Headmaster Barry Ray and to Headmaster Pete Sanders for bringing us through so beautifully and protecting that legacy that we all cherish. I'm confident in the future of MUS because what our school does in educating students is so needed in the world today. And finally, please know that I'm deeply humbled by your presence here and that my wife Angela and I are so grateful for what MUS and the MUS community have given us during my career at this great school. Thank you. We love you, MUS.
Well, Mr. Mutzi, again, congratulations and well deserved. So with that, the members of the Alumni Executive Board join me in thanking all who came here tonight. We invite you to stay around. Please visit with the Mutzis as we celebrate, and everyone drive safely and have a great night. Thanks for coming.